It's great to welcome to the program today Owen Higgins, who's a writer, historian based in New England. His new book is Owned: How Tech Billionaires on the Right Bought the Loudest Voices on the Left. It's so great to have you on. There's so many people in my audience who, over the last several years, have speculated with me when I take calls, etc. How did we see someone like a Tulsi Gabbard have the apparent political awakening at this stage in her life? It's sort of a similar question that we've seen sometimes asked about someone like a Dave Rubin. How do you end up being 40 something and all of a sudden your entire worldview reverses? And there's sort of something strange or unexplainable about it. Take us into kind of like the primary thesis in the book Owned as to big picture structurally how and why we're seeing some of this.
Sure. So I think I guess I'll start with the book, which talks about the influence and the power of tech billionaires who have kind of created this new alternative media ecosystem, or have if not created it, at least certainly funded it quite a bit. They put a lot of money and power into it, and that alternative media ecosystem kind of exists to provide a um, an alternative to the mainstream media, which they have become critical of mostly in the last 10 to 15 years, and primarily because the mainstream media, especially tech reporting, has become critical of Silicon Valley, has become critical of these tech billionaires. So they, in their kind of, usual way of doing things, decided that they wanted to switch things up. They wanted to change how this industry operated, and they found an opportunity to do that just by kind of throwing their money around. You have people like Mark Andreessen investing in Substack. This was,
Yep.
one of the large early investments in this stuff. He also co-founded, or at least like was an early investor in Clubhouse, which was kind of like an early kind of interactive podcasting network. Then you had David Sachs, who's now Trump's crypto czar. He founded or seed invested Callin, which was kind of a Clubhouse clone. You have Peter Thiel investing his money into Rumble alongside JD Vance. They led the funding round into that in May 2021. And all of this stuff kind of, it funneled a lot of money to alternative media creators. And I don't want to say it was all people on the right. I certainly, I took money from Colin. That story is in the book. But in order to kind of maintain your access to this money, to maintain your access to this power, you kind of had to toe a certain line. And people like Glenn Greenwald and Matt Taibbi, who are the focuses of my book, are certainly two people who did do that quite a bit. I'd say Taibbi maybe more blatantly and sycophantically than Greenwald, but Greenwald as well, kind of choosing who to criticize, choosing what topics to cover, choosing how to kind of engage in the culture war as these guys have, and also to who they criticize. I have obviously no problem criticizing Democrats. I probably do it more than I criticize Republicans, but I would say that with Matt and Glenn, they kind of do the same, but it's a more of a partisan thing. They don't criticize Republicans not because they don't see the point, which is kind of like for me, I don't really see the point in criticizing people who are my political adversaries. They criticize they don't criticize Republicans because they're kind of aligned with them on a lot of issues. I think you've seen that with Glenn now that the Trump administration is in power. While he's maintained some of his ideological criticisms of Trump on Gaza in the same way that he was critical of Biden on Gaza, and a couple of other issues. Overall, I mean, he's kind of taken a lot of what Trump has said and in a way that is kind of almost like strains credulity for how gullible he's being. Trump saying offhand he's going to cut the Pentagon budget, and then Glenn trumpeting on Twitter, "See, don't you see? That's really going to happen." Of course, it's not going to happen. He wants the
Yeah.
biggest Pentagon budget ever. And then somebody like Taibbi, I think, is just kind of doing this kind of gutter right wing politics at this point. But I think that what's interesting, I think this is kind of what you're getting at, right? Is that these guys have shifted. Like they used to be aligned with the left, and they used to at least have like criticism for everybody, or it used to be coming from what seemed like a place of principle. and now it's just kind of, partisanship. I would say that somebody, I just do want to add, I would say that somebody like Tulsi Gabbard, um, if you look into her background, her politics started on the pretty far right. She was a
Yes.
pretty hardcore social conservative, and then over time, she kind of became more quote unquote liberal as she kind of climbed the ranks of the Democratic Party, and then I think rather opportunistically kind of took the Bernie campaign in 2016 as a way to kind of strike out again independently. So I think that with her, I think there is some a little distinction to make there. But she also look August 2021. This is a few months after JD Vance and Peter Thiel invest in Rumble and Rumble starts handing out deals. August 2021, Glenn gets his big deal that's announced, but he's the secondary character, I think, in the Washington Post article about it because Tulsi Gabbard is the number one. So she's aligned with all of these guys as well, and has been for some time.
Is there I want to get back to like the tech space and the funding that you talked about, and then maybe we'll get back to the trajectory of some of these individuals. At some point, there was sort of the idea that the Silicon Valley tech space leaned left. And I wonder whether that was ever correct or whether social issues were overrepresented in that analysis when maybe there was like a more right libertarian economic perspective that just wasn't getting the attention maybe it deserved. So, starting with the funding and the tech space, has that space shifted or was it just not accurately described originally?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, it's kind of both, right? Like, so you have an industry where the people who are in charge, like most industries, are rather conservative, or at least are kind of more friendly towards the more pro-business policies, I think, of the Republican Party, or at least like that's how they would frame it. Um, but the Democrats are also pretty pro-business as well. I mean, like there's not a lot of daylight between the two parties, or there wasn't for a long time, at least as far as Silicon Valley went. The tech industry made billions of dollars off of George Bush and his so-called war on terror. They made billions of dollars under Obama doing the same thing. I would say that the big difference for the Obama years is that Obama really opened the White House to tech in a way that hadn't been done before. And so the tech guys kind of align themselves with this version of liberalism and this kind of vision of the Democratic Party that was friendly to Silicon Valley. And the Democratic Party, or at least as it existed under Obama, was very happy to do that as well. But I wouldn't say that during this time these guys were all liberal on social issues. I don't really think that they really care about it that much. I think they're very willing to kind of go with the flow on this stuff. You have people like Peter Thiel and people like David Sachs who have been pretty, arch conservatives for a long time. That did not stop them from making lots of money under Obama and from working with Obama's federal government to get contracts. So, but having said all of that, around like 2016, 2017, Trump wins. Pretty much all of these guys completely reverse themselves. They're like, oh no, we love Trump. Trump's great. Like they had just spent, like a whole, year basically saying publicly and privately that they didn't care for Trump. And, they're, I think that a lot of this too has to do with the fact that the Silicon Valley workforce is rather liberal, right? Like the leaders are not liberal, but the workforce is.
Yeah.
And so, a lot of these guys were just kind of trying to hit the balance. And once Trump got elected, then they all go to kind of bend the knee at this famous meeting with Trump in December 2024. This is facilitated by Peter Thiel, who was one of Trump's big backers, or basically his biggest backer in Silicon Valley, his biggest public backer. And after so that happens, I think that's like kind of part of the shift. And then there's the media has been getting critical of them for some time, and they haven't really liked that. They haven't really enjoyed like the way this social media has made it so that people talk back to them online. Like they don't like that, right? Like they don't think that the peasants really have a right to talk. I mean, this is my interpretation. I don't think that they think the peasants really have a right to like talk back to them. And so these things kind of combine, and then finally there's this final piece, which is that the Democratic Party kind of turns against the tech industry. And they do this primarily, I think, because they're casting around, they're trying to figure out like, how did we lose to Trump. And, especially in those early months, I think of 2017, the party infrastructure is trying in a lot of ways to find a way to say we lost to Trump that doesn't like specifically implicate anything about the party itself. And so one of the things that they do is they just go really hard into blaming social media for radicalizing the American people. I want to be like clear here that this is not like they're not wrong about that, but they went pretty hard on it. And again, I don't think it's bad to go after like any industry, especially not one as big as Silicon Valley. I'm just trying to like present kind of the context here. And so, over the next few years, once the Democrats regain control of the House, they start holding hearings. This is a very kind of antagonistic from the point of view of the tech industry situation. And it just kind of pushes these guys to the right even further, where someone like Andreessen in 2019 is now investing in Substack, and he invests in Substack. And what happens after that? Substack starts to kind of really promote like these more conservative voices. It starts to give a lot of money to a lot of people, but the conservative voices seem to be the ones who get the lion's share of promotion and kind of algorithmic favor, at least from the outside. That's certainly what it looks like. So all of that happens, and then of course you have COVID in 2020 and the Black Lives Matter protests, and this is kind of like a radicalizing moment for a lot of people who are kind of soft conservatives, and I think Silicon Valley is a part of that. So you kind of like trace that evolution and then kind of trace their investment at this point.
Yeah.
It kind of follows along that line.
Was there something, because you focus in the book and you talk about Glenn Greenwald and Matt Taibbi, was there something about them that made them ripe targets, either about their reach or something about their sensitivities or loyalties, or like what makes someone more or less susceptible to entering this kind of trajectory that you describe?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that, and I think that the answer once again, right, is kind of like it's complicated. So you have someone like Glenn who I say Glenn and Matt after 2016. I don't think either of them like particularly wanted Trump to win. I think they both wanted Hillary to lose, but I think those are different and distinct things, and
Yep.
they should be understood as different and distinct things. And I think that they watched as part of the Democratic establishment's reaction to this was not only to kind of go after the tech industry, but to kind of like go all in on Russia. And these guys really pushed back on it. And I was somebody who was writing a lot of pushback on this as well. But I would say that where people like myself and Adam Johnson, to name another person who was doing would like strongly differ with like Matt and Glenn, is that Matt and Glenn kind of stopped really criticizing the Republicans at all at this point. Like they stopped really, and Glenn has said a couple times on Twitter, at least around this time, that one of the reasons he stopped doing that was that people, if they wanted to hear criticism of Trump, they could just turn on the mainstream media, which is true, but it doesn't mean that there's not a space for independent media to also criticize Trump, because there are things that he was doing and is doing now that aren't getting maybe sufficient coverage in the mainstream media for whichever reason. I mean, like there's also like only so many hours in the day, right? And so I think there's a really strong place for independent media to step up and to do that. And I think that it's kind of an abdication of responsibility to take that position. But anyway, so they kind of start shifting, their audience starts shifting to the right, whether or not they do. And I think, kind of around, I think this is really a COVID thing, really kind of pushing. I'd say that Matt did have a kind of Me Too cancellation moment in 2017, late 2017. And that kind of, I think, kind of soured him on liberals and the left in general. And with Glenn, I think that, I think I think that for both these guys, there are a lot of complicated and complex reasons, but I think that if you had to boil it down to just one thing for Glenn, I think is that, MSNBC and CNN stopped having him on TV, and Fox did have him on TV, and you kind of watch his audience shift to the right, and his politics, at least the public politics, the stuff that he tweets about, the stuff that he writes about, start to shift to the right, or at least like stop prioritizing certain things that the left would like to cover, right? So by the time that 2020 rolls around, I think these guys are both prime targets for this funding, but I don't think that they were really like plucked. I think that they both, I mean, if you look at the trajectory, they both kind of went independent relative like within a year or two of each other, and then they were rewarded. Glenn got this, you know, huge contract with Rumble after, you know, making who knows how much money on Substack once he went independent on Substack. I want to be clear, Substack didn't give him money to come onto the service, but once he did, he made a lot of money off it.
Yep.
Matt didn't get money to come on to Substack either, or to move all of his stuff onto Substack primarily, but he did get plucked out of you know, any number of journalists to break this Twitter files story because Mark Andreessen recommended that Elon Musk, oh no, sorry, David Sachs recommended that Elon Musk have him do it. Mark Andreessen recommended Barry Weiss, who's another one of these characters, who for the Twitter files, which then, you know, like explodes Matt's Substack and makes him even more money. So
I wanted to ask you about Twitter
yeah,
files. It's interesting
sure.
you mentioned that because that was going to be my next thing. My recollection, I haven't looked at the numbers recently, but my recollection was that after all the buildup to the initial Twitter files, that first tranche got a fair bit of attention and really helped him grow his independent following. But the subsequent ones did not seem to do so well. And my retrospective memory of the whole thing is that was the entire Twitter files thing was significantly overblown relative to the blockbuster nature that was kind of attributed to it. Question one, is my recollection accurate as you see it? And question two, do you have an opinion as to whether Taibbi really saw the Twitter files stuff as much of a bombshell as was promoted, or that he saw it as a vehicle for growing his following primarily?
Yeah, okay. So I think the first one, your recollection is largely correct. I would say that the first tranche of files were about the Hunter Biden laptop story, which Facebook and Twitter made the, in my opinion, kind of questionable decision to suppress the New York Post story about it.
Mm-hmm.
However, this was kind of a complicated. I mean, it's now that we know that the information was legitimate, it's kind of hard to like go back and remember the situation at the time. But I think it's valuable to do that because even though we know that now, we didn't know that then. And it was totally reasonable for any number of platforms or media companies to be like, hold on, let's slow down. Like, this seems like a total rat fucking, if I can say that. You know, like this is a situation where it really seems like a political party is going after another political party, or like going after their candidate. We don't know where this laptop came from. We don't know if the information in it is legitimate. And so we need to take a step back. This was one of the things that Glenn didn't like that The Intercept did, and this is one of the reasons that he left The Intercept, was
Yep.
that they did not want to publish this stuff as fact because the provenance of it was just not clear at this point, and it couldn't be clear within time to publish. Which, as a journalist, I think like that's an ethical thing. I think that's what you have to do. But the tranche of files that he had, they were promoted as explosive, but there wasn't really anything in there that like says anything that I didn't just say, right? Like it seemed, you know, they may have made a decision that wasn't the brightest one, and you know, within 24 hours they reversed it. But that's not really an explosive revelation, and the rest of them just didn't really show that either. It was interesting from my perspective to see like kind of how Twitter operates, like, or how it operated. Interesting to look at that, but that's not a bombshell report. That's just like an interesting piece of news, or you know, something you can put into a book. I'd say the two pieces of news that came out that were interesting is that Li Fang, then of The Intercept, had a report out about State Department or something like that, these influence campaigns that were getting kind of green lighted by Twitter. And then Barry Weiss inadvertently revealed that Chaya Raichik, the Lips of TikTok lady, had kind of like extra added protections even under the prior Twitter regime. So that's a long way of saying, yes, your actual recollection is correct. There wasn't really much to it. As far as like what Taibbi believes, I don't know. I mean, I think that part of him believes that it was real because he has to, because that's basically what his career is about now. He certainly, I think that he really thought that it was going to be so explosive that it was going to be like the NSA stuff with Edward Snowden. He thought this was going to be his like blend moment. And it wasn't. And I think that part of his bitterness is based in that it, like people just kind of made fun of it because he promoted this huge thing and it just really wasn't that.
Yeah.
But I don't really know like beyond that, like how he feels about it. I will say that just from my perspective, Matt has completely lost the plot at this point.
That is as a not as closely following individual of the story as you are, that's the conclusion I've come to. But I do encourage my audience to check out the book to get a much broader and more detailed perspective on what we've spoken about here. The book is Owned: How Tech Billionaires on the Right Bought the Loudest Voices on the Left. And we've been speaking with the book's author, Owen Higgins. Really appreciate your time and your insights today. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having me. Thank you.